Warning, this episode may contain content that is not suitable for children. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hey everyone, welcome to LED Live. Today we are going to address the question of what does science have to say about homosexuality?
Find out on this episode of LED Live.
We've done a couple of programs on this and we've had some questions, so we decided on this episode we would bring a real scientist, a biologist, a PhD in biology. Dr. Aaron Corbit is here with us today to address this issue. Dr. Corbit, thank you for being here.
I suppose it's good to be here. I have to admit, being a little bit nervous about this. I was noticing you guys have a lot of subscribers. I was I think I was looking, it was like 50,000 or something like that.
So
which is, I was doing just, back of the napkin calculations.
Yeah.
Like of all the students, assuming that no student repeated a class in the 7 years I've been teaching at Southern Adventist University, it came to, 2,500. So you're like an order of magnitude in terms of reach higher than any I've ever done.
Nice.
So, that, and I guess even when I teach this in a class that I teach at Southern and talk about these issues, it's always a little bit nervous, because this is such a hot topic. It raises people's emotions quite a bit. I guess I want to be careful about not coming across in a way that is unhelpful or reflects poorly on Christ or, those type of things. And that's very easy to do when you talk about this issue.
Well, it's the number one reason why we wanted to do shows like this is because we need to understand. And sometimes, I'm not a homosexual, so it's like for me to try to wrap my head around how to be sensitive to this, to someone that is struggling in that field, but then also still aiming them at Christ. I mean, that's the main goal here.
That's the same issue I struggle with. I mean, I don't know. This might still be a work in progress. I mean, how do I relate science and this issue and what the Bible says and all that kind of stuff? But yeah, I don't have same-sex attractions either.
That's right.
So, trying to get inside and really listen and understand what the evidence is and what it isn't is a challenge. And that's one of the things I found is looking at this issue, really any issue I've ever looked at, whether it's what I did my dissertation on, whether it's, everything, reality is complicated. There's always nuance, there's always complexity that goes in it. And so you got to be careful about really listening. I think one of the text that I like is from Proverbs. I think it's Proverbs 18, talks about that to answer a matter before hearing is shame and folly.
That's right.
And so really taking the time to listen and understand before you try and have an opinion on it, or at least a solid opinion, is really good biblical counsel to follow.
Well, if you read any of the comments on some of the videos that we've created on this, there is a plethora of people that have a lot to say on this topic. So I'm excited to dive into this and hear what you say.
All right. I guess I need to plug my my own media that I'm trying to get started out there. So we're starting a podcast. I don't know, we're kind of slow burning right now because I have to try and be a full-time professor. And so this is a podcast. It's called Nature and Revelation. It's about science and faith issues. We might want to branch out. I don't know. I have one YouTube video up there, I think, at the moment.
Awesome.
But yeah, so if you want to check that out, it would be natureandrevelation.org.
Awesome. So kind of blending biology and Christianity.
Yeah, that's what we talk about. So, the first podcasts we've done that are up there, I think, what do we have? 7 of them so far. That,
awesome.
They're really focusing on, it's evolution and origins issues and how to relate to that.
What I love is how science, real true science, when you really look at it, it really does point to a finger. Somebody's created this thing. And I think it kind of proves Christianity through and
Well,
through.
Certainly there's plenty in there that screams design.
Yeah.
I think you certainly need scripture to get a full picture. But nature by itself can testify to design.
I just read a book recently on design. I think it was called The New Origin of the Species. Are you familiar with that?
I am not.
It's written by a Harvard biologist.
Okay.
And I think his last name was Jensen. And it brought up a lot of really interesting things that I had never thought about before. And so anyway, if you're interested in creation, design models, you might check that book out. We'll see if we can put it in the link below.
All right. Well, I guess I do want to start just when we talk about this issue, just making sure that we're in kind of the right place, because I have had interactions with people. I mean, I'm a scientist. I go to scientific conventions. I have just met people, let's say on Facebook, right? And the attitude that comes out, especially when you talk about the secular world, secular academic world, when it comes to Christianity, is one of, there's a little bit of disgust there.
Right.
And the reason for that kind of has to do with the idea of you Christians, you think you're just so better than everybody else. You're holier than thou. And the term that's often used is moralizing. Whoop, there we go. So this is a quote that came from, this is a book, I'm just starting to read. This is the very first chapter. It's basically Science and Ethics. It's basically a book all about how science informs ethics and morals. This first chapter is by, was it Paul Kuntz? I think that's how you pronounce his name. He was actually very well known. I think he was very well known as a secular humanist and atheist. So the first chapter is sort of dripping with sort of this anti-religious sentiment. But this I thought was interesting. So he talks about so the danger of moralizing. So you got some degree of skepticism is a necessary antidote to all forms of ethical certainty. We are continually surrounded by self-righteous moralists who claim that they have the absolute moral virtue or piety, or nor the secret path to salvation, and wish to impose their convictions on others. And he goes on, they are puffed up with an inflated sense of their own rectitude as they rail against unbenighted immoral sinners who lack their moral faith. So these ethical systems, so he's talking about certain religious systems, become especially dangerous when they are appealed to in order to legislate morality. And then he goes on, that last quote, hell hath no fury like the self-righteous moralist scorned.
That's true.
And so, yeah, this is, every time we talk about this issue, I'm sure, if you have people looking at your channel or, that are, let's say, atheists or secular humanists, they're going to be like, I'm sure this is the first thing that comes into their mind. And what I found interesting when I read this particular quote is that I don't think he's alone in having this view. I think Jesus is a person who actually had the same view about people who stand up above others in terms of placing themselves on a higher moral plane than everybody else.
Interesting.
And the place that comes out, I think this is Luke 18, so the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector.
Sure.
And if you look there, verse 9, the very start, this is who the parable is directed to. The author here is telling you who the parable is directed to. And it says, to some who were confident in their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else. Jesus told this parable. And to some, I mean, that's kind of like Pharisees, because it's a Pharisee stood by himself, right? Yeah. And he's like, look at me, I'm great and wonderful, and I tithe, and I'm not like that tax collector over there. And so Jesus is saying, okay, you Pharisees, you who think you are on the moral high ground, you are the ones who are in danger, not the repentant sinner down below. So this is, and yeah, oftentimes when even Christians talk about this issue on media, anywhere they go, this is how what it looks like to most people out there. So we got to be careful, very careful when we talk about this issue. Let's talk about kind of what this presentation is about. This is it's kind of based on this. So this is Lady Gaga. This is actually even articles I read from homosexuals who have, talk about this issue, what causes it. This is like a pivotal thing in society about how you reason, the moral reasoning behind whether homosexuality is right or wrong.
It's like she's popularized this particular idea.
Yeah, so it's born this way. The lyrics are kind of interesting. I pulled some out here. So I'm beautiful in my way because God makes no mistakes.
Right.
There's some theology here.
Right.
I'm on the right track, baby. I was born this way. And of course, she's very clear in the lyrics that she's talking about, non-heterosexual types of sexuality. That's okay, right? I'm on the right track, even if I'm gay, straight, bi, lesbian, whatever it is. And so this is dominated. And usually the dynamic I see in media is one of, you kind of take this, well, either if you're born that way, then that's a straight line to saying that it's okay to be that way.
Right.
And behave in whatever ways go along with
Right, because it's not your fault. You didn't choose how you would be born.
Yeah, and so it tries to go in with, oftentimes this is kind of the top way because it tries to tie in with like the civil rights movement because of course you're born with your skin color, you can't change it, that kind of a thing. And so if you're born that way, this is
Right.
almost justifies.
And I'm sure you're going to get
everything.
into this. How much does culture actually influence the biology?
Yeah, we'll look at some of that. I mean,
Okay.
theories about how it comes about.
Okay.
And so actually the other side is even Christian groups will pick up on this, and they still use this same premise. The hinge is the premise: are you born that way or not?
Right.
One interesting side note, we did a video on her. She proclaims to be a Christian. She talks about how she prays before every
Yeah,
show.
okay, and that actually comes out in this. She talks about capital HIM in the lyrics to the song.
But then in another song, she sits there and says like how much she's in love with Judas, and it's like.
Well, I mean,
way
it was
twisted.
tough to watch this video because it's
sure.
hyper sexualized.
Yeah.
Even this, I was looking at this and going, "What is this about?" If you
Right.
look like the full image, it's like her being
Transhumanism.
proposed onto a motorcycle,
Right. Yeah. Weird.
and it's like I was thinking, what is that supposed to symbolize? Like, what do you do with a motorcycle? I guess you ride a motorcycle.
right.
Is she designed to be? And that doesn't seem like a very,
Very
uplifting
true.
message for women. There.
Right.
So,
Right.
Anyway, so yeah, even Christians, I think, get into this. And so what you have is Christian literature that will try and say, no, you're not born that way. And somehow if you're born that way, then it's not a choice, and that somehow leads you down a path of saying this is okay. And if it's, if you aren't born that way, that somehow it's on you and it's your choice and
Right.
whatever and that. And so what I want to do is actually look at that. But yeah, just start by looking at some statistics here. This is some statistics. There's a range, depending on which study you look at, of what percent of the population identifies as something other than heterosexual. So about 3.5% of the U.S. population identify as gay, lesbian, or bisexual, and that number varies. So some will say 4%, and it depends how you measure it too. 'Cause
Now, is this still current today?
this is current. This is fairly current, yes.
Because it seems like it's becoming more and more prevalent. I mean, I have people in my immediate circle that I know that are gay, and I mean, I'm sure you guys have people that you know. I mean, it's like
Yeah,
you do the numbers, and that just
it just seemed. Yeah, I've wondered a little bit, but everything I read would suggest, and especially the things I was looking at, particularly for this presentation, there's these two big review papers. One is by a fairly conservative group. It's in the journal called The New Atlantic, and I think they're fairly conservative. But the other one was by a guy named J. Michael Bailey, who's at Northwestern University in Chicago, who's very much sort of,
got his finger on the
pro.
pulse of it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and so, but the case that seems to be made is this number hasn't really varied through time.
Right. Interesting.
And it might just become more prominent, more accepted, and that's why you see it more.
Right.
But again, it depends how you measure it. If you just give somebody a survey, and there's what they call the Kinsey scale, and you ask them, on one side, are you completely straight or homosexual on one side, and there's a few options in between, mostly bisexual, you get about 3.5%, 4%. The interesting one I looked at was there was one that looked at Google searches and asked the question, what percent of the population actually searches for homosexual pornography? And based on that, they were estimating maybe it's up closer to 8%.
Interesting.
So somewhere in that
Might not
ballpark.
even be fully accurate. I mean, straight men might look up lesbians.
Yeah, that's true. So, this is, 4% isn't,
It's not a lot.
It's
which
not a
is
lot,
crazy
but
that
it's a
they've-
lot. It's a number of, when you
Right.
consider you're talking, what is it, over 300 plus million people in the
Right.
U.S.
And that they've
you're at a
been able-
number of about 9 million people.
Yeah, that they've
in
been
the
able
US.
to actually sway legislation to completely change our ways of thinking and rules and laws in our country is fascinating to me.
Well, I just go back to the quote from earlier where he talked about, legislating morality from, was it Kuntz?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that's a double-edged sword because there's all kinds of people that are trying to legislate their own version of morality.
Right.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I mean, I certainly would agree with separation of church and state, but I guess that does work both ways.
It does work both ways.
I mean, on one hand, we don't want to legislate morality on either side of any moral issue,
Right.
really.
I agree.
It kind of so here's our distribution. Yeah, if you do that Kinsey score, you can see here, completely heterosexual, mostly heterosexual, bisexual, mostly heterosexual, or completely homosexual. You can see the vast majority of people.
We're completely heterosexual.
Yeah, you can see here, they've blocked, you cut it off. So we have, of men, right, this is 90 plus, 93, 94% are going to say, I am completely heterosexual. Women's,
Wow.
notice women's a little bit less there.
Yeah,
This
that's
is one of the
interesting.
interesting things that came out looking at some of this, is that women are kind of built slightly different in terms of their sexuality than men are. You'll find more, there's a little bit more what's described in the literature as sexual fluidity in females than males.
Maybe they're more like wanting emotional connection.
Yeah, there's maybe an emotional component there, but you'll notice here, if it's completely heterosexual, men are the majority of men. There's fewer females. If you like mostly, then females are higher than males.
I think that just
With
shows how-
bisexuals, this is self-identifying. More females than males are going to identify as bisexual.
Interesting.
And yeah, if you look at their completely homosexual,
It's mostly males.
it's mostly males, right? So part of that really does have to do with this phenomenon.
Yeah.
It's fairly simple to turn a man on. It's much more complicated.
Wow, perfect.
And this
love
comes
it.
out in the research too. That's because most research is actually done in males, because understanding male sexual orientation is a bit
easier.
simpler.
Here's a
You know,
woman.
they will do stuff that we might consider unethical type research. Is basically, let's put some electrodes on your genitals and show you pornography and
Oh,
see what
wow.
turns you on. All right, and
Who would sign up for that?
yeah, so what you find is, if it arouses a man, that goes right along with the sexual orientation. It doesn't always with women.
Wow. Interesting. It's more in their head.
Yeah, and sometimes
physical.
women will see, especially if it's close, personal, intimate relationship with another female, they might actually feel some sexual attraction in that situation.
Interesting.
Where a man would not.
It's more relational based than physical
Yeah,
based.
it's more relational based. So, yeah, it's interesting. So because men are simpler, more research is geared there. That's kind of how science works. If it's a simple thing, we know more about it.
Right,
If it's complicated, we know less.
Got this one figured out. It's a switch.
So let's see here. This is another thing to keep in mind, and this is going to become important as we interpret some of the other results of some of the data that we're going to look at. And that is this idea of gender nonconformity. And what you find is that the majority of people who identify as homosexual will have had some sort of gender nonconforming behavior as children. You can see here, it's like 89% of men who are homosexual. So this is basically desiring to guys playing with girl stuff in a very, not just I occasionally put on a dress or something.
So
this
something
is like
you recognize
this is
early
something
on.
you recognize early.
Okay.
And this is, the same for, homosexual women. It starts out, so there's a very, and that's going to play a role here. Now, this isn't quite the same as transgender. Gender dysphoria isn't quite the same thing, so they think these people are still identifying as males, but they really like to play with dolls, stuff like this, all right? And this seems to continue into adulthood. So, people joke sometimes about gaydar. Like, I can tell just by looking at someone what they are. And actually, apparently this has some basis in science.
Interesting.
So when they've done stuff, with movement pattern, speech, physical presentations, facial appearance, cognitive personality traits, they seem to match. They're not quite with what's typical for
I remember
their gender.
kids growing up and recognizing from an early age, okay, this person is acting or gets along with the females more than the boys, and sure enough, you just wait long enough, and in their adult life, you see the little posts of how they've come out of the closet or whatever, and so I mean, I've witnessed this in my own life.
So this doesn't really fit with any particular theory about why, but it does come into play when we're going to interpret some of the data that comes out. So that's why I put it up here in the beginning. But let's see here, let's look. Causes of homosexuality. This is what's in the literature. We've got 4 of them here, 4 major ones. One is hormones, one is genes, non-social environment, and then social environment. So non-social environment would be just stuff you're exposed to that doesn't have to do with interactions with other people. Right, social environment has to do with interactions with other people.
So if someone molested the child,
so that kind of a thing, parent-child relationships, interpersonal relationships, anybody, whether it's abuse or whatever it is, right? So, and the other thing to keep in mind here is that these aren't necessarily mutually exclusive causes.
Sure.
Right, because genes are going to influence hormone production. How you environmental input might affect how you express a gene or express a hormone or things like this. So it could be none of these. It could be all of these.
Right.
These aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. So we're going to go through these kind of one at a time, and we're going to start with hormones here. And the first thing to talk about is there's actually an interesting way, apparently, to kind of figure out how much testosterone you're exposed to as a kind of young developing fetus in your mother's womb.
Wow.
And it has to do with finger length ratios. So it's the second digit to the
know
fourth
what our
digit.
hands-
And in anatomy physiology, you count the digits. This is your thumb's digit 1. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's the index finger and your ring finger. The ratio of the lengths.
So if those are equal,
All right?
I've been equally exposed.
So basically, it's women have larger ratios than men, so they have a longer index finger, proportionally to the ring finger.
Interesting.
All right.
Okay.
So yeah, everyone at this point, I'm sure, is looking at themselves, going, "Oh, what am I?"
Yes.
All right. So I guess my ring finger's a little bit longer. So
Yeah,
men
mine's a
should
little
have a
bit
little bit longer. So that's a little bit more testosterone.
Okay.
So what we find though is homosexual women tend to have a more masculine ratio.
Interesting.
Okay.
So it
So
might
if you
suggest.
look at a woman's hand, you can tell if she's more masculine? Is that the idea?
I don't know if it's when you do statistics, it's always on average. And so on average, you find this, but sometimes, just because the averages are slightly different,
be
doesn't
outliers.
it doesn't mean it's easy to tell just
Right.
by looking. Oh yeah, you have a ratio that says. So I don't know if how descriptive or how well it diagnoses
Right.
that.
Right.
But at least on average, moderate correlation, so you see a correlation coefficient there that goes between 0 and 1. 0, yeah. Anyway, so it's kind of moderate there, but unless it's there. Notice there that the research doesn't find a difference between guys. So a homosexual male and a heterosexual male seem to have roughly the same.
Interesting.
So, all right, that's interesting. We can move on here to another. This is certain developmental issues that come up. So, what happens, the first one here we've got, this is called congenital adrenal hyperplasia, which is in women, especially in women. Guys can have this too, but it's more interesting to think about in women. So these are women that have a disorder, so your adrenal glands sit right on top of your kidneys, and they actually are involved in producing some androgens. Now in males, testes take over, and that's really the only game in town. But if you're female, some of the androgens, they do have some of these, much less, but they're produced by the adrenal glands. And so hyperplasia has to do with lots of cells, overproduction of these androgens. And so from a very early, even then developing in the womb, they are, flushed with male hormones. And so, this is often caught and there's things that you can do about it. But if they track these people, usually what happens, this will actually have outward physical effects. Right, so what I've got here is during development, so the development of tissue that's going to make a vagina versus a penis is all the same tissue. The same embryonic tissue that makes testes also makes ovaries.
So interesting how
Yeah.
we're so similar, but yet there's
Yeah, so if you just turn on a gene,
Yeah.
so on the Y chromosome, we call it SRY gene, it's going to shift development. And so what happens if you're loaded with these male hormones, even though you're genetically female, in this particular situation, is you often have the kind of a halfway in between type of a thing. So, the outer parts of the parts of folds of skin outside the vagina are kind of what fold and become scrotum or part of the shaft of the penis. The clitoris is going to become like the head of the penis. Those are equivalent parts. And so if you've got what's kind of forming a vagina now gets a big shot of male hormones, it kind of goes, I don't know what to do, and kind of ends up somewhere in the middle. So you might have what they call an elongated clitoris.
So like,
things
is this, how common is this?
I don't think it's hugely common. It's pretty
Okay,
rare.
okay.
I don't know off the top of my head, how many, but it's a pretty rare thing. But they have studied this, right? And they sort of say, all right, what's the sexual orientation? What's the outcome in terms of sexual orientation? And it turns out that women who have this, CAH we call it, do have higher rates of homosexuality than women who have not experienced this. Although the interesting is still the majority are still heterosexual or identify as heterosexual. So it's a greater, so you see that 60 to 70% are still heterosexual as opposed to 4%, which is kind of on average a little bit less. So 4 versus 40 is still big,
Right.
but still the majority are
Right.
heterosexual.
And could, social interaction maybe have swayed that? Maybe men were kind of like repulsed by her anatomy or something, so she's like,
Yeah, interesting.
yeah.
Could be. Well, we'll look at that a bit more. But that's kind of interesting. Hormones maybe seem to have some effect here. Here's some other ones that are interesting that you have to deal with. This is an interesting one, complete androgen insensitivity syndrome. This is where these people are genetically male. They have an X and Y chromosome. The gene on the Y chromosome activates, and its testes are pumping out testosterone. But the receptor that picks up the androgens is gone, is shut off. So it's basically the signal to become a male is present, but the cells that are supposed to carry out are just not listening. And so the default, it turns out, is female. So these people have testes, but they're undescended. They're up where the ovaries would be, up in the body cavity.
But they have female genitalia.
Yes and no. They don't have a uterus. They just have a
So
vagina,
this person
though.
could not have a baby.
Yeah. Their vagina sort of dead ends.
Interesting.
Sometimes it's shorter or longer. Some of them have to get, if they want to have sex, have some reconstructive surgery to actually make something that you can. And you can see, I mean, really, they look female. Yeah. And so, but yeah, they're XY. They have testes. So what happens with these people, the vast majority of them identify themselves as heterosexual females. And that's the way they live their lives. And actually, it's a little bit shocking. I mean, if you can imagine, you feel like you're a girl, you're raised a girl, you have the girl, at least external anatomy, and really when they figure out what's going on is usually puberty. They're like, wait a minute, I should be having my period and I'm not. So then they go to the doctor, and the doctor's like, I hate to tell you this, you're a boy. And you're not, it's like, whoa. Yeah, head exploding. It's kind of rough for these people, I think. So,
Wow.
But here's hormones. This is the hormones being produced, but the cells aren't picking it up. But yeah, what do you call this person? Is this person gay or straight?
Right.
But
They look like a female, but they have a Y chromosome.
not common.
Yeah, this is not common.
Super rare.
It's like a
pretty
mutation,
rare.
right? A cell mutation or something.
Yeah. I think I need to look that up. It's probably the gene that makes the receptor to pick stuff up is probably broken and it's not receiving the signal. Here's another one. This is called 5-alpha reductase deficiency. This is an enzyme, and enzymes are basically, cellular machinery. They facilitate chemical reactions inside your body. And so in this case, there are actually two forms of testosterone. One is kind of the general version of testosterone, and then there's one that's like super potent, called dihydrotestosterone. And 5-alpha reductase is the enzyme that turns testosterone into dihydrotestosterone. All right, so if that gene is messed up and this person does not make the dihydrotestosterone, then there's something kind of, this is a weird thing. They're often born with more ambiguous genitalia, kind of like in the case of CAH. But it's often maybe more female than male. And these people will basically be born. Often they're assigned as a girl when they're born, based on their genitalia. But then, at puberty, they get this more shot of hormones. And all of a sudden, their testicles that were undescended now descend, and they grow a penis.
Oh, wow.
Like they become more virile. So what was less like a penis now is much, much more like a penis. So you can imagine that situation where,
When does
oh
that
wow,
happen? Around puberty?
yeah,
you
around
said?
puberty, right?
It's another surprise.
Yeah, that's another surprise. So I kind of had something that was more like a vagina, and all of a sudden through puberty, now I've got something that's much more like a penis.
Wow. I did not know that there's a lot of these things going on. Like people could change like that.
Yeah, it's crazy. So
Yeah, I was familiar with like hermaphrodites, where you
Right.
have two, but
Heard of that.
from one morphing to the other, never heard of that.
Would they call this kind of a hermaphrodite?
I think the term I've seen in religion called it pseudo-hermaphrodite. I mean, true hermaphrodite is something like a snail, where I've got both boy parts and girl parts, and I can, I'm both, I have both testes and ovaries. This is like one or, there's only one set there, but you're sort of halfway in between. Sometimes they call that like pseudo-hermaphrodism. But yeah, so what do these people identify as? Many of them were raised girls, right? This is again very rare. The Dominican Republic is where this was first isolated, and there's like this family lineage of some of this. But the majority of these, there's a few that they've documented fairly well. And in this case, most of them identify as heterosexual males, in spite of the fact they were, many of them, raised as females.
Interesting.
And they transition to first identify as a male, even though they've kind of identified as a female this whole time, and then they just transfer to identify as a male. And now they eventually, most of them, take on the role of a male. I am a man, I'm going to marry a woman, and we're going to assume the gender roles in that society.
So really they were like a male that you just couldn't tell. They were male inside. And
Yeah, they are, yeah. So, yeah, in other words, the testosterone was still present. And so you might argue that maybe that has something to do with sexual orientation and impacts on the brain.
It's like a slower development.
Yeah, but then, finally at puberty, things start to catch up in terms of the external anatomy. So, kind of interesting. It'd be kind of tough to be a person like this. I think. Grow up, I'm a girl, and all of a sudden, whoa!
Right.
All right, so you can see here, basically the point here is that in these cases we see that maybe there's some evidence that hormones play a role in sexual orientation. We see like in androgen sensitivity, apparently to pick up the hormones is just not there, and so they sort of, even though they have a Y chromosome, they didn't get the hormones, so I sort of end up with a female sexual orientation, right? Here I did get some male hormone, but just my, external anatomy didn't, develop normally. But I still end up generally with a heterosexual male orientation. So that's kind of interesting. Now the downside here when you look at hormones is going to be that usually if there's a hormone imbalance somewhere, you expect that, you might expect yes to affect the brain, affect sexual orientation, but you would also expect it to affect the genitalia as we see, right?
Right.
But most, lesbians or gay people don't have any problems with their, right? And so that's where this gets a little bit tricky. On one hand, we have a little bit of evidence to say, well, maybe hormones are involved, but on the other hand, the majority of people, this doesn't seem to apply because most people don't have issues in the development of their
They kind of take the
anatomy.
biology where you do see some of these changes and they run with it and apply it to sort of the big group.
Yeah, so let's look at the second. I missed this. This is another part to it. This was a big deal when it came out, especially this study by LaVey in 1991. Which was finding that male homosexual brains look kind of like female heterosexual brains in a particular part in the center of the brain called the hypothalamus. And so this goes along with the hormone hypothesis because maybe the hormones are affecting the development of the hypothalamus, and that's pushing sexual orientation in one way or the other. But this has been criticized too, right? Because how you behave affects your brain too. Right. So if I was a musician, actually the interesting study I saw was on, this is cab drivers in London. And these are people that have memorized the maze of streets that are in London. And they were actually measuring brain differences because of that. So which is it the brain differences causing the sexual orientation or the behavior, homosexual behavior causing the changes in brain structure? That's unclear here.
Yeah, I've actually heard that the brain of someone who's addicted to pornography is changed.
That could be, yeah. So anything you do to yourself and expose yourself to can change your brain. All right, so the next one here is the genetic hypothesis. The big question there is there a gay gene? So this has been big in science as well. There's two ways we kind of get at genetics here. One is to actually look and go sequence genes and figure out, I can look at genes between family or gay people and not gay people and see if there's a correlation between this gene and your behavior. The other way here is twin studies. These are interesting because you can look at identical twins versus fraternal twins versus, just brothers that aren't twins. And you can get a look at, if one twin is a particular way and the other twin is exactly the same way, you're saying, well, this might be genetics, right? If it's one twin or the other twin, are the same, but the fraternal twins are the same too, you might say, well, their genes are different, so maybe this is more environment than it is genes, right?
Do you see in twins, do you see a common if one twin is gay, the other twin typically?
That's where we will go here. So I think we'll start with that. No, let's start with the genes here, and we'll get to what we call concordant studies, which are actually some of the most informative, I think. But is there a gay gene? So this is a big question. This is the biggest one, probably the most studies. This is a gene on the X chromosome. This is actually how we map a chromosome, XQ28, right? So the bottom half there of that chromosome is the Q side of the chromosome. And we sort of mark, number bands, and we get, so XQ28 is right at the end of the X chromosome. And what was interesting is that this person found, what was his name, Hammer, I believe, 1991, I'm trying to remember.
Not MC Hammer.
That's what I was
Yeah, no, not MC Hammer.
They did some genetic research on MC Hammer. Cool.
But yeah, you would expect just by chance that two brothers are going to share a gene about 50% of the time.
Okay.
Right? But they were finding a statistically significant, so with this particular gene, it's 64% of gay brothers had the gene as opposed to ones that were not, all right? So what does that say? And that's kind of complicated to interpret, right? Because you would expect if you got, most people think if it's genetic, it's like written in stone, that's the way you're gonna be. And so it's like this switch, right? You're expecting a switch, and what you're kind of expecting is 100% of the time if you have this gene, you're gonna be gay, right? And if you don't have it, no, you're not gonna be gay. But here it's like, well, just a slight majority. What does that say? Well, it says maybe that this gene has some role in it, but it's not 100%.
It's like it could make you a little bit more susceptible to it,
so
but probably your environment
if you're
is
talking,
pushing you over the edge.
Right, if you're talking in epidemiological terms, it's increasing your risk.
Likelihood.
Yeah,
sure.
so I'm kind of saying we talk about that when we talk about, diseases, right?
Right.
If we want to live a healthy lifestyle, right, and I eat more fiber, that'll reduce my risk of cancer.
But it's not a guarantee.
But it's not a guarantee, right? There's been other ones. So, this has been looking between gay brothers and looking at concordance between, these particular genes. Some of them now are just like, we can sequence a whole lot really quickly and try and sequence the whole genome and try and pick out, if I, sequence someone's genome and I give them a survey, like, are you, on that scale of mostly, I'm a heterosexual or a homosexual or somewhere in between. And they found a few, right? So chromosome 8 was one. There's a gene there. There's chromosome 13 was one. This is fairly recent. I forget the date on that, but it was more like, just a few years ago. The interesting thing here was the chromosome 13, the gene there, seemed to be associated with brain development, which made them harken back to that research on brain differences. Maybe this is a gene that's causing the differences in the hypothalamus that is pushing this one way or the other. But again, most of these are sort of in this ballpark, right? We have a preponderance that more people who are gay seem to have this gene. But here's kind of a correlation in this case, right? And, if you do statistics, if you take my statistics class, just because I have a correlation doesn't mean that's causation. You have to do more. You need correlation to show one causes the other, but it's not sufficient by itself to say one is causing the other.
So are all chromosomes have a P side and a Q side? Or
Most of them do.
It's like that biology joke, mind your P's and Q's.
There you go. I have not heard that joke, but you should make one there. Okay, the other part is twin studies, and this is what question you were asking about, concordance. So what's interesting about this, and there's more than this. This is just some of the studies that have been done. The earliest ones was interesting. They say it's 100% concordance. If one twin is gay, the other one is always gay. This was criticized very quickly in the literature because earlier studies tend to recruit. They only recruited from the gay community specifically. And so the argument is, you're getting a completely biased sample. And so later studies that were bigger, so it goes from 100%, and now we're down in the 20-18% range here. All right? And so one of the interesting things about twin studies, this is a more recent one here, is that you can kind of do some, mathematical modeling of this and try and come out, okay, what percentage of this trait is genetic? What percentage of this trait is kind of individual environmental differences? So, and what percentage is, shared environmental differences, right? And this is what, in this particular study, this is Langstrom 2010, this is what they came up with. So genetic is 35 to 39% of the variance. So there's some genetic there, kind of this going along with some of these other studies, this XQ28, location on the X chromosome. Shared environment was 0.
Interesting.
And then the biggest factor was in unique environmental.
So what's the difference between the shared and the unique?
Well, so, if I'm a twin, I expect I'm raised in the same household. Sure. There's very similar.
So they found that was 0.
That was not involved.
So back from the 1950s, 100%.
Yeah, so
0 today.
Well, yeah, so, and unique environmental is like, 2/3 of. Wow. I don't know, how do you interpret that?
Right.
Yeah, I was going to say, can you
Right?
just clarify a little
Because you kind of, the expectation I think a lot of people have is like, oh, it's genetic. That means, you flip the switch, you're gay, that's it. Right? Or the other side of that, oh, it's completely environmental, and it's due to your upbringing, it's due to your parenting, it's due to, I was abused as a child, whatever it is,
There
right?
was no dad or...
Whatever it is, absentee fathers.
This is more of a blend, and it's kind
Yeah,
of
this
like
is
60-40.
It's 60-40. And what does that mean? I'm not sure. It's kind of tough to interpret. This leads. So this is again Bailey. Is sexual orientation genetic? This is the big review paper that he put together. This big researcher, Northwestern University in Chicago. Yeah. So this is what he says about, is it genetic? Based on the evidence from twin studies, we believe that we can already provide a qualified answer to the question: is sexual orientation genetic? And the answer is, boy, it looks like a really hedging answer here.
Yeah, right.
Probably somewhat genetic, but not mostly so.
I mean, kind of, but...
So that right there is him going like, I don't want to be ousted and people slamming me, but yeah, we're not finding the evidence to say that it is.
Yeah, so
Not 100%.
see,
100%.
it's interesting though. When I showed this to my class, right? And a lot of them will feel like, oh, this is science. They just don't know what they're doing, and the expectation is that scientists just, they find the facts and those are true, and that kind of a thing. And so they kind of chalk this up to, oh, science is less than what I thought it was, I can write it off. I don't think that's what's going on here. I think he's actually being honest with the data he's got, right? The data we've got.
Right.
We do have, the twin studies seem to be the studies that really say something, but then, how do you interpret that? It's
Perhaps
sort of 40% genetic and 60% not genetic.
Yeah.
How do you interpret that into real life?
Perhaps why God gave us twins is literally for us to have a window into, some of these cases and stuff.
It certainly is a natural experiment.
There's been twins all throughout, we've got records of them way back in the Bible.
Oh, yeah.
Jacob and Esau being twins. And
those clearly had to be fraternal twins if one is smooth and one is hairy.
Yeah, right. That's very true. That's very true.
All right, so is it genetic? Well, yes, somewhat. It seems to be the answer.
Yeah.
All right, so what about some of the other one? Environment. So this seems to point out, okay, environment seems to play a big role. What types of environments do we have? So we can have two types of environments that they talk about. One is the non-social and one's the social, right? And those are the two we talked about before. Non-social, often when you look at the literature, these are in fact factors prior to birth that they talk about. This is like conditions in the womb.
Okay.
Right? So it's not necessarily genetic, although, genes are involved in expressing certain things. But when in the literature, when you look at a non-social environment, it often means these are conditions in the womb. All right?
Isn't that crazy that something that happens in the womb can dictate what that baby's going to experience their whole entire life?
Yeah.
I mean, the argument of, it's not a life until it comes out. There's a lot of evidence that there's a lot going on there.
Although I still, you got to be very careful there.
Yeah.
This is one thing I point out to my class, and I think there are pro-life people that sort of make this leap, and I don't think they should. Way back, this is what, 1500s? I'm trying to remember now. A guy named David Humes. This is Scottish. This is before atheists were really a thing, but he was about as close as you get to an atheist at that time. All right. He had this idea. So at the time, people were sort of thinking that, you call it, when you did science, you did natural theology. And one of the things people tried to do is say, oh, God's creation is such and such a way. I can reason from that by itself to some moral purpose. So kind of a quick analogy. I don't know. I went to a Christian college, and in the dormitory, one of the things that was pushed by the dean was like, eagles mate for life. And what's he trying to say by that? Because eagles mate for life, that means you should too, right? That's what they were trying to do in essence. I think they would have more sophisticated reasoning. But Hume pointed out that's not very good reasoning. What he said was that when you go along, this is the way nature is, it's this way, this way, and all of a sudden you switch and say, therefore this is the way things ought to be. And he said there's no logical connection between is and ought.
Right, because penguins will mate with that one penguin, and then the next year it's off. They got another penguin.
Well, I mean, a lot of birds we know that we used to thought mate for life.
Yeah, right.
They pair for life, but that female sneaks out, and
interesting.
there's a term in the literature. It's called extra pair copulation.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, they did.
Can't make it a rule.
They basically did, they did the whole Maury Povich thing on the offspring in the nest, and found out, he is not the father of some of these, but yeah, so I mean, anyway, you can't. So yeah, basically his point is, just because I know the way things are doesn't mean the way things should be. And what that translates into how most scientists think about science is that science is about what is, right? So if a developmental biologist is talking about human life during development, they're not attaching any moral significance to that. They're saying that's outside of the bounds of science. It's just biologically, living, things are happening in there. Chemical reactions are happening, and it's alive. And it's also human. And I think it's a step too far for people to take that and say, oh, that means we need to. So that idea that means something in a moral or ethical way doesn't come from science. It's coming from somewhere else. Certainly as Christians, you would say that's coming from, let's say, Scripture, right? Yeah. But I think we need to be very careful when we talk about that we're not making science, make value judgments or give moral, so yeah, that's how I feel about it too, because I think science, this says what is. I need my Bible to say how things ought to be and how I should live my life.
Good point.
Right?
Good point.
All right. So let's look at some non-social environment. This is an interesting effect. Not all of the papers I know about actually support this, but there's been several studies that seem to show there's something called the Big Brother effect. And what that means in some papers is that if you're a person, the greater number of older brothers you have, the greater your chances of being gay.
Interesting.
Yeah, it seems opposite.
So if you've got 10 brothers, you're toast.
Yeah, well, it's not quite that. So you're kind of increasing your risk by 33% or so.
Good thing
This is what
line.
it looks like in terms of numbers, right? So if you have no older brothers, then maybe 2%, right? Chances of being gay. And it goes up. Maybe you have 4 older brothers, maybe it's up to 6%. So it's not huge, but it is an effect that has been measured more than once.
Maybe it's because they pick on them.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking. We had a guest on this show who was a homosexual transgender growing up, and he was the youngest, the littlest, the runt, always picked on.
That's true.
Never seemed like he measured up even in school. So he always got along better with his aunts and.
He lived in a household of girls too.
Yeah.
Like it was just all girls. There wasn't any brothers, were there? I don't think there were any brothers.
Yeah,
so it was all
I think
girls.
and all of his cousins as well.
Yeah, all his cousins, girls.
So certainly environmental, but then also he had father issues that played into that. But.
Actually, in the literature where this fits in, is they call it non-social environment, because the idea here is that one theory is that maybe if a woman carries a male child, there might be certain male characteristics that maybe something about her immune system is picking up on. So if you have a second male child, then maybe some of those, immune system might cross the placenta and attack male centers within the fetus. And so the more older brothers you have, or the more male children that woman carries, the greater that probability of that happening. Now, I don't know much specific evidence that supports that, but it would help explain this effect.
So that's why they're calling it non-social.
Yeah, that's why
it doesn't have anything to do with your social interaction with your brothers.
Right.
It's from the womb.
Yeah. So, but then again, the other thing about this is that we're only talking, you're only increasing your odds 6%, and what's pointed out is this effect by itself cannot explain the majority of homosexuals that exist in the United States or other places. So while it's interesting,
so these are the hard facts.
Yeah,
but you can't apply that in the same way.
Well, it's just not sufficient in terms of numbers to explain the 4% of the population that is identifies as homosexual.
Right.
All right, social environment. Here's several that have been looked at here, and there's some interesting data here. One, recruitment seduction. This, is interesting. I think it was a video. It was kind of from like the 1960s, I think. It's just black and white, and it was basically a video like, all right, young boys, be careful of over-friendly male adults, because they will try and seduce you, type of thing. Is there data there? Well, maybe. We do have one study here. Boys who had age discrepant, which means they're young, somebody's old, age discrepant early sexual experience, especially with men, we're up to 7 times more likely to identify as homosexual or bisexual as adults.
So even if there's no biology, like none of those statistical switches or anything in their background, if something happens, somebody touched them, they're more likely. That's
Well, now for males this is clear. It's less clear in females what's going on here. The data isn't quite as clear. But here we got to be careful how we interpret this. All right? As before, so the other example was we have brain studies, right? And the brain studies, we have a slight difference in the brain between homosexual men and heterosexual men. It's more similar to heterosexual women in the hypothalamus, that kind of it's kind of right in the center of your brain, near the bottom. Kind of if you go right between your eyes, straight back, about halfway, that's about where it is. All right. That could be interpreted 2 ways, right? You can either say, this is a change early in development that sort of causes, same-sex attractions, or it's maybe the same-sex behavior changes the brain, right? So you can do it either way, right? Here, you actually have another explanation that people will point out, and that is, remember way back at the very beginning, we found that correlation that most people who were identified as homosexual at 85%, also had some sort of, childhood gender nonconformity type stuff going on when they were young, right? And so people will say, well, this might be because they're different from birth, and that either might attract or, they can be identified kind of early on. So if there's some guy who's like, oh yeah, you're young, and I can see, oh yeah, you're also going to end up this way. So it might be being early on, you might be born that way essentially. And then you have characteristics that lead you to be more likely to have kind of early encounters, right?
So like they're being profiled.
Yeah, so instead of this early sexual experience causing, right, it's that you're actually different from, a young age, and that's picked up on, so you're just more likely to have these experiences, right? That's kind of the same thing here. Abuse is similar, right? So non-heterosexual adults of both sexes are much more likely than heterosexual adults to have experienced child sexual abuse. Now again, it could be the abuse causes, right? But again, it could be that, if I have a child, gender non-conforming child, that might invite abuse. So again, we're sort of ambiguous here, and what's the best way to interpret that? But yeah, it seems a role. I mean, women, 5.3 times greater odds of, or men 12.8, almost 13 times greater odds.
Right.
The other one, parent-child relationships. This was an interesting study here. This is a huge study. We've got 12 million people on a registry. This is Danish people.
Wow.
In this case, it's not exactly like being gay specifically, but it was gay marriage. So it's legal in that particular place. And so what is gay marriage associated with? Well, it's older mothers, divorced parents, absent fathers, being the youngest child. And I think some of the stories that I've heard from people talk, these come into play in their own. I think the person you were just talking about, some of these are coming into play, right?
Yeah.
So there seems to be something potentially there, although I think you might criticize this. We're not actually measuring whether or not they're homosexual. It's whether or not they got gay married, which might be slightly different things. But so you got to be careful with the interpretation. All right, parent sexual orientation. This is one sorry. I think the worry, especially with some Christians, is if you're raised in a home where your parent is gay, are you more likely to be gay? There's one study that may say something like this, although it's been pointed out it has some problems. But here, this is, compared with children in still intact biological families, children with homosexual experienced mothers, so a gay mother, had higher rates of, first one there, non-heterosexual orientation. And then a bunch of other stuff. Unemployment, welfare assistance, having experienced coercive sex, so have you been raped, right? Depression, drug use, etc. Right?
This would be a complicated study because if you have a homosexual couple raising a child and they don't turn out gay, you'll say, see, it was genetic. He wasn't gay.
Well,
but
yeah.
if they do turn out gay, you'll say, see, it was genetic. His father was gay, so he's gay.
Well, that's why you got to be careful when you understand the statistics. Because when you do statistics, you're trying to look at stuff on average, and you're trying to get away from cherry picking, right, which we tend to do. I like this data point because it confirms what I already believe, as opposed to trying to get at what's going on in general with all the data.
Mm-hmm.
All right, now with men, homosexual. So if you have a gay father, you do still have some of the other stuff, welfare assistance, stuff like that, but they didn't find more likely to be gay. The problem with this study was these findings may be confounded by divorce, which means that a lot of these, like welfare assistance, especially with women, let's say I'm in a relationship, I have a kid, I decide I'm gay, does that end the relationship, right? So now as the mother, potentially she has custody of the kids, and she's just lost a big source of income, and now she, so sometimes women who are divorced, they struggle because they now have to look after the kids plus try and hold down a job, and that leads them into welfare assistance and depression and drug use, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the study wasn't very clear, but maybe there's a hint of indication, maybe. But yeah, here's basically the conclusion through all of that. We've gone through all of them now. This is what Bailey in his paper, a big giant review paper, said. No causal theory of sexual orientation has yet gained widespread support.
Wow.
So what's the take home here? I don't know. What did you guys hear?
Yeah.
We don't know.
We don't know.
Yeah, you can't put your finger on it and say 100% it's the biology, we are born this way.
Right.
Which is what popular media, really, this kind of a conversation, probably there's very few of young kids that are exposed to this kind of data, this kind of information, this kind of a class.
Yeah.
And I'll guarantee you they are exposed way more to the I'm born this way, Lady Gaga
That's
scientific
much more,
perspective.
Yeah.
And
that's the thing. Trying to read scientific literature is not something that is
Right.
necessarily easy to do. There's a lot of understanding that goes in there. I've been fortunate to have the education to really get into it, but try and, there's a lot of stuff that goes on in science that doesn't trickle down into popular culture that really should.
Right. Which is why we wanted to do a show like this, is really to kind of lay down like, hey, look, we did a couple shows. We showed, listen, this is what the populace is pushing as normal. They're making TV shows about it.
Right.
They're just putting this out there as this is the way that it is. But when you look at the scientific data and you kind of try to put your finger on both of those, they're really saying quite different things. And even the take home that I appreciate from this conversation as well is not to make a generalized statement, even on the Christian side.
Yes.
And to just basically say, oh, well, it's all choice and it's all family environment and everything like that.
Right.
Because there is actually some scientific basis for, listen, some people are struggling with this thing, but they really had a lot of pre-factors that fed into that.
Yeah. So, and that's actually one thing. Bailey here in his paper, his big review paper here, he does kind of want to make the case. So there's a part of his paper that really comes, this is the best case for you actually being born that way. And let's just kind of show you what that is for a moment. It's two things that he's really pointing out. One is this gender nonconformity early, right? So you can pick up these kids very early, and you really can't call a gender nonconforming child gay or straight. You don't have, it's not until puberty you start having sexual attraction at all. And so because he says you can identify it here, you can identify it as an adult, that's strong evidence to him anyway, that maybe they are in some way, whether it's genetic, environmental, whatever it is, they might be born that way. The other part, which is very interesting, he picks up on, is this. This is an interesting, he follows, so kind of the 1960s up through 70s, even in maybe late 90s, doctors kind of dealt with certain malformations. These are congenital defects, you're born with this. The idea at the time was in psychology, I think, was blank slate theory. The idea that everything about how you internalize your sexuality is all culture. This was the academic view for a very long time. It's not anymore, but at the time it was. And so the idea was that you could, if somebody has just really messed up genitals, especially males, right? So females, if they have messed up genitals, it's easier to make a vagina than a penis surgically, right? So what this guy does, he's followed some. So cloacal exstrophy is it's just like a genital defect that kind of messes up your lower abdomen and can mess up your genitals if you're a guy. And so the idea was, all right, we know you're a male. Let's say we know your chromosomes, right? But it's just a lot easier to make a vagina than a penis surgically. So we're just gonna give you a vagina, have you raised a girl, and you'll be fine. You'll be a girl. All right. And so this guy followed him. There's a few here. This one, I'm scared of these. Surgical accident. I don't know if this is the circumcision gone wrong, but it's like, so again, we've messed up your genitals surgically now.
Oh, no.
We'll just give you a vagina, call you a girl, and you'll be fine, all right?
That would be the worst.
So this is what they did. So what have we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cases, all right, where this followed. And he said, all right, you're just a girl, we'll raise you a girl. If you look at the very end, all of them tend to be, all but one are identifying as male when they grow up.
Wow.
And all of them,
even though their sexual parts,
even though they were surgically made female,
yeah.
and given hormones probably and the whole thing.
Which that's a very interesting study based on that whole transgender, because I mean, when we poured over stuff for the transgender topic, I watched a ton of regret videos. I mean, it was just people that literally were just crying out to the cameras going, I wish I would have never done this. I mean, this is just
that's a whole nother discussion.
This did not solve what was going on, because who we really are has a lot to do with those chromosomes. And if you're male, just swapping out the body parts.
It also might depend on how things develop. Did I get hormones at the right time? All kinds of stuff might go into this. But this is his point, really. It's like, even though I surgically changed these people, it did not change their sexual orientation for the vast majority of them. And so based on those two things, he's going to argue, all right, we don't know what's going on here. But he would argue that the best evidence is, for most gay people, and I'm not sure he makes any blanket. I mean, it could be different people have different reasons. I don't know. But, that there is a case to be made that, you're born that way. So let's get back to here. I often think when we phrase it this way, we probably phrased it in a probably incorrect, the crux of the argument often in popular culture is born this way, right? But is it really threatening to a biblical worldview if they really are born that way?
No.
So the interesting thing, if you look at the theology there that I was kind of pondering there, it was, I'm beautiful in my way because God makes no mistakes. I'm on the right track, baby. I was born this way. Is that proper Christian theology right there?
No.
Well, I think we're all born sinners, and there might be some data to say you might turn out to have more of an addictive personality. But the thing is we're drawn to sin, whether it be drugs or homosexual lifestyle or anything.
And that's where my understanding of it is in the topic of addiction.
Yeah.
If your parents were alcoholics, you were conceived in alcoholism, you're going to come out more prone to alcoholism.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
So yes, technically you are born that way, but it's not something that God doesn't make a mistake.
Yeah.
It's almost like...
Well, it's kind of interesting to try, because the argument almost seems to be that God made you perfect just the way you are.
So stay there.
Yeah, so you're fine just where you are.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure, I don't think that's biblical. I mean, the version of born this way from the Bible is, this is Psalm 51. This is an awesome psalm, by the way. This is the one where, Nathan the prophet confronts David because he, killed a man to take his wife. This is David and Bathsheba. So this is him repenting from that sin. So, it's like, wash me and all that kind of stuff. It's a great psalm, but this is one of the verses there, verse 5. Surely I was sinful at birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me. And so this is kind of the biblical version of born that way. And that would say, in one sense, God doesn't make mistakes, but there's another sense in Scripture that carries all the way through the theme from the beginning to end. Way back in Genesis, it's humans have screwed up. And there is, the fallout from that means that we have a propensity to sin. Sometimes, have maybe, I guess it's temptations, right? We might have powerful biologically based temptations.
There you go.
Right? That in some cases, we have a very, very hard time, and nobody actually succeeds in resisting all of them, right?
This might get you in trouble a little bit, so I'm going to throw it out here anyway.
Yeah.
What if you're a parent
Yes.
and you notice that your child has a propensity
Oh, boy.
or
I think,
leaning more towards homosexuality? How do you grapple with that?
Oh boy, I think that's out of my pay grade.
I mean, do you guys want to take a stab at that? How
I
would
think
you deal with that?
I would want to go to find a psychologist somewhere to try and address that question. I'm not sure what I would do myself.
It sounds like, based on some of the data, how you raise that child is going to there's some weight in how they're going to turn out, at least environmentally, the nature nurture. But yeah, I don't know. My point I was going to make was, based on the verse that he just shared, it seems like born this way is a logical fallacy for continuation. If I am born that way, therefore I do not need to change. If you go with the Psalm 51, I'm born a sinner. If I'm born with propensities toward alcoholism, does that then mean I should stay an alcoholic the rest of my life because I was born that way? To me, it seems inconsistent with the Bible that whatever way we're born, we should only stay that way and never change.
And true in David's case, I was conceived in sin, I'm a sinner, I killed this guy, I stole his wife, so I might as well
he's
keep
not
going.
saying he should stay that way.
Yeah. Right. He's lamenting that.
I think that's the part of what the lyrics on Lady Gaga's song sort of suck out of it. Like, if that's the case, that God makes no mistakes, you're perfect, you're born that way, that sucks out the entire core of Christianity.
Exactly.
Because the core of it is repentance, right?
Yeah.
Coming to Christ, recognizing that you're a sinful human being,
right,
and coming to Christ, and it sucks that completely
Jesus
out of
would
it.
not need to come if there was no change.
Yeah, that you just be perfect the way you are.
Just take away the cross completely.
Or there would be no waiting. What's the point?
Yeah, well, there'd be no, the necessity.
He wouldn't have even come.
Yeah, because we're all perfect be anyway, right?
So your worldview would dictate how you would navigate the issue, because if you have a child that looks like they're going to be homosexual, we're taught, embrace that, tell them it's okay and to keep doing it. What if it was, my kid seems to like the beer, I let him try. Here's another one, buddy, you're an alcoholic like your old dad,
Yeah.
That happens a lot.
The Bible
I've actually
says,
seen that.
But the Bible says we're to raise up a child in the way that they should
Exactly.
go.
I think the caveat on that is that there are no guarantees.
There aren't any guarantees.
And
yeah,
so
I think
it was interesting. I heard it was commentary on like the book of Proverbs, right? So that's where that comes from.
Mm-hmm.
And I tend to agree with them. What they were saying was that those things that are said there in the book of Proverbs are just sort of wise sayings in general, rules of thumb. They're not necessarily promises, right? So there's no guarantee that if I do everything right with my child that they're going to.
They're not.
Right.
I'm just coming at
But
from
maybe
the
on average
responsibility
you
of a
hope
parent.
that they will, I guess.
Yeah.
Right.
On the other hand, the other thing though is I think, the thing to be very, very careful of is doing the wrong thing. Because, thereof, in the name of, because, I think that gender and certainly gender roles and all that stuff has changed hugely over, it's between biblical times and now, because the nuclear family really didn't exist in biblical times. It was, this big extended family, right? And so, you're playing with a doll, not a truck, smack the kid, that's probably can do more harm than good doing that. So that's why I'm very, that's why I guess I'm conflicted about what do you do about that, right? I don't know.
Right. It's a difficult and sensitive subject, and when you get to that place, which there are many families I know that are dealing with this, and for circumstantial, whether it be social environment or even biology of the child growing up with something leaning to that. I mean, I've talked with parents before, and it's just rips at them. So I mean, I think first and foremost, you would really spend some serious time, prayer. God, how do I deal with this? How should I treat this? Because it's a difficult subject, and until you go through that, I'm sure personally,
right,
to know how you're going to cross that bridge, you know?
Yeah. Actually, I was going to, bring up this text here. This is Paul in Romans 7. And he's talking about the struggle he has, right? And it seems like there's this deep, he might call it the flesh, this deep visceral part of him that he just says he can't control, right? He says, for I do not do the good I want to do, right? But the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. Now, if I do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who do it, but sin living in me that does it. So he's like, this is powerful, maybe temptations I have that I can't even overcome, right? And of course he goes on to say, right, what wretched man I am, who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death. And thanks be to God who delivers me through Jesus Christ, our Lord.
That shows our absolute need for a Savior and a Redeemer. We're just messed up.
Yeah, so I mean, being born that way sort of fits into here, but that doesn't mean born that way doesn't necessarily justify anything that you do.
Stay that way.
Yeah.
That's kind of the thing that I see in popular culture. Born this way, stay that way.
Right.
As opposed to change.
So the other part to bring out here is just the idea of temptation. There's a separation between temptation and action, right? So this is Christ here, right? For we have a high priest. This is in Hebrews, referring to Christ, who is able to empathize with our weaknesses. But we have one who has been tempted in every way, as we are, just as we are, and yet he did not sin. So the temptation isn't the problem. I think this is a thing that I think we forget when we talk about any sexual issue. Right? Oftentimes, I think of this, this is a parable that's often brought up. This is the woman caught in adultery, right? So these are, religious leaders, Pharisees, they're trying to trap Jesus. They apparently entrap this woman, right? And drag her to the feet of Jesus and say, what should we do? Moses says, stone her to death. So they are the accusers. She has done wrong. She knows she's done wrong. They're the accusers. And, what does Jesus do in this situation? Is he one of the accusers? I mean, no, he's not. He starts writing in the dirt, and certainly doesn't actually say in the passage what he's writing.
Right.
But, one good interpretation is actually writing out the sins of the people who brought her.
Yeah,
right?
As they drop their stone.
Right, as they drop their, and then they're like,
because part of the Mosaic law was
Yeah.
that you had to be sin or not have any of those sins to be the one that would cast the first sin. So if he's writing in the ground and he's giving them a visual, look at what all you guys are doing.
But see, that's the thing that I think Christians have often been, they haven't been Christ in this situation. I think oftentimes Christians have been those accusers. I want to uphold this moral standard. I want to be the moralizer, right, that we talked about at the very beginning. And we got to think very hard and carefully about how we go about approaching this issue, because we often come off as, I'm holier than thou. And what Jesus is doing with those people is saying, oh, wait a minute, we're all, you and this woman are actually in the same boat. You just don't recognize it, right? And writing out their sins. And I think that's what we've got to remember, is that we're all in the same boat. Well, and I think that goes, the other thing that I see is that sometimes church is not a safe place to be a repentant sinner. And so I've seen this in a few places. One, I had a student one time come to me, and he was, it's kind of part of the class that I teach, and he was struggling with like bisexual issues. And he's like, what I took from him was that, I understand that, this is a temptation, whatever, and I agree with the idea of what's the Christian sexual ethics, in this situation. But he's studying to be a pastor. Who does he tell? Who does he get help from? Right? Is it the minute the congregation finds out, he's gone?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right. So, and I think that happens, and I think that's kind of the judgmental culture that's been imbibed by a lot of these LGBT groups, and that's why they feel that the church is very judgmental and whatever. Because they see us as the role of the accusers of this woman, instead of a redeemer, somebody who gives them hope, right? And so, I think that's the call to Christians, to try and walk that road, recognize that you and whatever person, whatever sexual issue is going on, you're in the same boat. The only difference is we know about that person, they don't know about what I'm doing, right?
See, I think this example that you brought up here is a perfect example, even dealing with homosexuality, because whereas Jesus was not condemning, so to say, like even when he says, where are your accusers? They're not here. he didn't just stop this point right here. He literally turned to her and said, "Go and sin no more." There's a moral line here that the Bible is very clear about in the topic of homosexuality. Often what homosexuals hear is, if you're a homosexual, you're not going to heaven. But they miss the rest of that verse that says if you lie, if you cheat, if you're an adulterer, if you're, I mean, we are in danger of adultery in the same way that a homosexual is in danger of adultery. Where I have kind of take up an issue with the topic is when people just say, I'm going to take out white out, and I go, I don't like this, I'm going to wipe that out, I don't like this. Because if you said that in the same realm of like stealing, I'm a klepto, I like to steal things, and you know, I think it should be okay. So I'm just not going to read the Bible verses that talk about stealing. I'm going to skip over that. You can't do that, because then you've now shifted the moral line to what you are interpreting it.
Right.
And I think the same way with homosexuality is it's like there is a moral line here that the Bible is very clear on, and it's very clear on all those other sins that go along with it. But to single one out or to erase one is where we get ourselves.
Well, that
in
reminds me.
water.
It's Romans 1, I think. That's one of those lists of a text that talks about homosexuality, but it also talks about this vast majority of other things
that we are in danger.
Yeah,
of.
like disrespectful to parents, I think is one of those, right? Or lying or gossip, I think is there too.
So the balance is upholding the moral line, but at the same time doing the other thing that Jesus was trying to teach, and that is you still need to love your fellow man. You need to love your brother. You need to care about them. You need to, be encouraging them. You need to be praying for them, not demoralizing them, because everybody has something that they're struggling with.
Right.
That's right.
And it's just that we know what some people are struggling over other people. And so it's, yes, we need to uphold what the Bible tells us, we should strive to reach for, but at the same time, don't demonize everybody else who's having a problem, because we're all having problems.
Right.
I think there's one more aspect to that we need to be careful of, and that there's some counsel that Paul gives, and I'm trying to remember where it is now. I think it's 1 Corinthians, I'm trying to say like 7, somewhere in there. But he's basically addressing sexual immorality in the church, right? So it's, what is it? A man has his father's wife, is how he puts it. And he's very hard on that and saying, kick this person out. But at the very end, he makes this interesting, he kind of shifts, right? And he says, okay, if you're in a body of believers, right, and you all have this agreed upon set of standards, right, then if somebody's flaunting them, then they really don't belong, and that's why you expel the immoral brother, right? But he says, do not judge people who are outside the church. Right?
Interesting.
And so, because then he said, well, then you'd have to go to the world and you'd have no one to evangelize, right? And that's what you see with Christ here. I mean, one of the things that Christ gets accused of is hanging out with tax collectors and sinners. He's hanging out with these people. I don't think they feel that he's judging them when he's doing that, right? Certainly he's trying to win them over and show them love and stuff like that, but he's not judging them. In fact, these, the people in this story, these are the people, let's stone this person, we've judged you, you're worthy of death. Christ saves her, right? And so I think one of the things we often do, we often look out at society and say, oh, you're this and you're that and you're going to go to hell and whatever else. And the Bible says, don't do that. Don't judge people who are outside, right?
So let the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, let the Holy Spirit
grab their heart, and once you're a Christian now let's show you what being a Christian's like.
Right. So once they're here, and then they can be confronted with, all right, this is what the Bible says and what it doesn't say. And then that's on them to come to that and decide, this is what I want to do, this is what I don't want to do.
That happened in my own life.
Yeah.
I mean, I was still drinking and smoking weed and living with a woman as a Christian, and as I began to actually read the Bible, ooh, wow, I need to do something about that.
Yeah. So that's why that kind of gets back to this moralizing. Let's not be judging the world. Let's have this. But what Peter talks about, we have an answer for people who asks for the hope that you have, why you believe what you believe, why you do what you do. But you're not out there beating them over the head with it. Right?
Good point.
Yeah, and the other thing to remember here is that this, no matter which, if it's more liberal, more conservative, academic literature, all of them are agreeing on that people who are non-heterosexual are at some risk. They're more likely to commit suicide, more likely to be depressed, more likely to have anxiety disorders, And so we really not, oftentimes I think there are Christians who see these people, these are sexual deviants, they're evil, let's shun them, whatever. These are people that need help. And some of the reason why they're likely to have these is because of judgmental attitudes that they've run across from society, from Christians.
There's no hope for me, even the Christians hate me.
Yeah, right.
Well
There's no hope. Yeah, exactly.
If we're not offering hope, who will?
Yeah.
Right. So, we got to be, and that, all sexual. I mean, one of the ones that I had a conversation with somebody recently was about pedophilia. If you find yourself, so pedophilia is interesting because not all pedophiles are predators, are child predators, and not all child predators are pedophiles. There might be a higher risk there if you are a pedophile that you might, but there's different things, and I think it's the same thing as temptation versus action, right? But yeah, if you find yourself in a position where, the definition of a pedophile is someone who's sexually aroused by prepubescent children, right? Let's say you find yourself in that position. I recognize that for whatever reason, that child is, I'm becoming sexually aroused by children. What do you do? You might recognize, no, that's wrong. I should not act on that. But I'm going to struggle with that. Where do I go? In this society, you go nowhere, right? You can't reach out to anybody.
Well,
church
trying
included.
to make that normal, though.
Well, I don't know. See, that's the issue. When you talk about, you've been comparing and contrasting, let's say, pedophilia with homosexuality. Pedophilia has a clear victim, right? And we know that if you sexually abuse a child, that messes them up for a long time to come. So there's a clear victim there, and I don't really see society normalizing that because of the child as a victim. Homosexuality is different because societally, there is no clear downside. There is no clear people getting messed up if two consenting adults doing what they do, right? Who cares? And so I think it's much easier to see the downside and for even secular people to recognize why pedophilia is, not pedophilia, I shouldn't say preying on children, because we got to make that distinction between pedophile and child molester, because they're not the same thing. So, yeah. So I think that distinction we need to think about, and that's why it's harder to make a case to a secular audience that homosexuality is wrong, because they're looking, what they think is wrong needs to have some societal harm that's big and obvious for them to recognize that this is probably not something good. And it's harder to make that case with homosexuality, which is why I think it's, that's part of the reason why it's come to the fore, why, gay marriage is legalized, why it's being more accepted even among Christians in the US. So I think there's a distinction there.
Isn't there a higher rate of disease and stuff, like AIDS and things like that?
With
homosexual groups?
Well, it
Probably from promiscuity.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. So there are Christian groups that will say that homosexuality is okay. And the strongest case they really have for that is that the forms of homosexuality that existed in biblical times are different than they are today. And so the argument would be, it's not the homosexuality per se, it's, if you're going to be a homosexual, you need to be monogamous, be faithful, all those things that go with regular marriage, right? So those churches would say, well, the AIDS epidemic and how that got started, it was somewhat, I don't know, it was associated with certain very promiscuous gay lifestyles, in San Francisco and other places that made it sweep across the US. And so they would say, no, the issue there is the promiscuity, not the homosexuality. So really where we are then is, is how you interpret Scripture in this case, And I think, at least for me, the best interpretation is, this behavior is not okay. But that's something I think somebody who is in that position needs to come, be shown love, and then come in and then recognize as your story, right? Yeah. Where, all right, I'm convicted not by somebody beating me over the head, but by my encounter with Jesus through Scripture. I don't know, I had one more text here.
Okay, read the text. Read the text. Yeah, let's do it.
All right, this is right after Jesus is just called Levi Matthew. Right, so Levi Matthew is a tax collector. And this is where this is the major place where Jesus is accused of hanging out with tax collectors and sinners, because Levi Matthew throws this great banquet for Jesus with all his friends. And then the powers that be that come up to him, why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? So Jesus is right there with them. And really, in that culture, the Jewish people at that time, they're under Roman rule, right? And they don't want to be under Roman rule. They want there's Messiah to come to kick out the Romans and set up this great kingdom. And so if you're a tax collector, what are you? You're a Jew, you're collaborating with Romans, you are a traitor. You're about the lowest of the low. You're even below sinners in this case, I think, if you're a tax collector, right? And those are the people Jesus is hanging out with, right? And so those are the people he's bringing hope. And then, Jesus answered them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." And to try and unpack that, right? What does he mean by that? I've not come to call the righteous. And in this case, he's talking to these Pharisees, right? And what he's really saying is, you think you're righteous. I'm not come to tell people who who think they're righteous, who think they're high and mighty, who think they're on a different moral plane than everybody else. I've come to meet sinners. And so we all need to recognize that need. We're all in the same boat. Doesn't matter who we are.
So basically, take home is really, we need to come at this topic, especially with outside of the church, with a lot of compassion, with a lot of understanding, that all of these different variables have gotten these people at this place. Right. And, win them over with the love like Christ has won them over. So that's a good takeaway, and I appreciate the science and the research that's really trying to explain a lot of these very difficult topics for us to understand. So it's awesome. There'll be some comments on this one for sure.
Likely.
Well, we want to thank you guys for checking this out. Don't forget, Dr. Corbit here is got a channel. Remind us of the
Nature
YouTube.
And Revelation.
Nature and Revelation. There's a podcast. Where can we find the podcast?
Natureandrevelation.org.
Okay, nature and revelation.org. Check it out. Hopefully we can have you back on the show. We'll do some more because I think the scientific perspective is really very interesting to me as we kind of
I think it's
unpack.
big. I mean, it's
It is.
I was looking at what was it? It was a book on scientific philosophy I looked through, and what it pointed out is in the modern age, like if you were 100 years ago and you wanted to pull in an expert, you'd pull in clergy, you'd pull in a pastor, right? Nowadays, who do you pull in?
Right, the scientists.
You pull in the scientists. So modern culture listens to scientists often more than they listen to pastors.
Right. Yeah, that's right. So, in this particular topic, especially, in dealing with the topic, are we born this way? I mean, there was some very interesting stuff that came out of some of this research that really kind of showed us, hey, there's some evidences on the biological side that we do have some propensities that might push someone towards that, but really a large portion of it is not as well. So we hope you found this beneficial to us. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so that you can get all the newest, latest, and greatest videos that we've done. And thank you for watching our videos. We got lots other on these types of subjects, and if you got any comments that you want to talk about this or anything you want us to cover in the future, put it in the description or the comment section below, and we will try to cover it for you guys. Thanks for watching.